James walked into the barber shop with his son Tyler, expecting just another routine haircut. But the moment they stepped inside, a strange silence fell over the room. The barber, an older man with silver-streaked hair and a hardened gaze, barely looked up from his clippers. Something was off, and James was about to find out why. James pushed open the heavy glass door of the barber shop, the small brass bell above it jingling softly as he and his son stepped inside. The scent of aftershave, warm shaving cream, and freshly cut hair filled the air. A familiar, almost nostalgic aroma. But something about this visit felt different. The usual background hum of electric clippers droned on, but the moment James and Tyler entered, a subtle shift rippled through the shop. A few customers sitting in the waiting chairs lifted their eyes, some exchanging quick glances before looking away just as fast. A man reading a newspaper lowered it slightly, his fingers tightening around the edges of the pages. The barber, an older white man with silver-streaked hair and a deeply lined face, barely flicked his gaze upward. His fingers moved steadily as he guided the clippers across the scalp of his current customer, but there was an unmistakable stiffness in his posture. James noticed it immediately. The tension. He had felt it before, in different places, in different ways. Sometimes it was loud and aggressive, like an outright slur spat from a stranger's lips. Other times it was quiet, subtle, a presence in the air thick enough to taste but invisible to those who didn't know how to recognize it. But James knew Tyler, blissfully unaware of the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, grinned and bounced beside his father, his curly black hair slightly overgrown and messy. "Dad, can I get the cool fade this time?" he asked excitedly. James smiled down at his son, squeezing his small hand gently. "Let's see what they can do, buddy." The barber shop had the old-school charm of a bygone era, black and white checkered tile floors, red leather chairs with footrests worn smooth from years of use, and large mirrors framed in dark wood that reflected the warm glow of the fluorescent lights above. The walls were lined with black and white photographs of past customers, a few framed sports jerseys, and shelves stocked with pomades, combs, and straight razors. It was a place where men came not just for a haircut, but for conversation, community, and a sense of routine. James had driven past this shop many times before, but had never stopped in. It wasn't the closest barbershop to their house, but today, with Tyler's regular barber fully booked, he had decided to give it a try. After all, a barbershop was a barbershop, right? As they stepped forward, James cleared his throat slightly and glanced toward the barber. "Got time for a walk-in?" The old man finally lifted his gaze, his gray eyes meeting James's for the first time. A flicker of something unreadable passed across his face. He hesitated just a beat too long before speaking. "Yeah," he muttered, shifting his eyes back to the clippers in his hands. "Just give me a sec." James nodded, guiding Tyler toward the waiting area. He could still feel eyes on him. The room hadn't returned to normal, not fully. He watched as the barber finished up with his customer, brushing away stray hairs from the man's neck before snapping the cape off with practiced ease. The customer, a middle-aged white man with salt and pepper hair, stood, stretched, and reached into his wallet. As he handed the barber a few bills, he glanced briefly at James and Tyler. There was no overt hostility in his expression, just that same unreadable hesitation. Then, without a word, he turned and left, the bell jingling overhead. As the door swung shut behind him, James exhaled slowly, adjusting his watch. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the long pause, the tension in the air, it was all in his head. But when the barber turned toward them, his face stiff, jaw set, James knew he wasn't imagining anything at all. Something was off, and he was about to find out why. James stood, his hand resting protectively on Tyler's small shoulder, as the barber dusted off his chair. The air in the shop felt heavy, pressing down on him like a weight. He was about to tell Tyler to climb up when the barber finally spoke. "Don't cut their hair." The words came low, almost mumbled, but clear enough to be heard. For a moment, James thought he had misheard. The phrase was so casual, so devoid of hesitation, that his mind struggled to process it. But the way the barber kept his eyes averted, the slight tension in his shoulders, James knew exactly what he meant. Tyler looked up, confused. His bright brown eyes flicked between the barber and his father, his small fingers tightening around the fabric of James's sleeve. "Dad? What does he mean?" James swallowed, forcing his voice to remain even. "Excuse me?" The barber sighed, as if he had been forced into an uncomfortable situation rather than having created one. He busied himself with sweeping up hair from the floor, refusing to meet James's gaze. "I don't cut their hair," he repeated, his voice dull, matter-of-fact. James's fingers curled into a fist, but he kept his tone steady. "Why not?" The barber exhaled sharply, finally glancing up. "I just don't," he muttered. "Ain't got the right tools, don't know how to handle their kind of hair. Their kind." The word stung, a sharp, familiar slap. James had heard variations of this excuse before, sometimes hidden behind politeness, sometimes wrapped in condescending smiles. But this was different. This was blunt. He felt his chest tighten, but he kept his expression unreadable. His father had always told him, "You never let them see they've gotten to you." The shop had fallen eerily quiet. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between James and the barber. Some looked away, pretending to be engrossed in their phones and magazines, in anything but the moment unfolding before them. But no one spoke up. James took a slow breath. "You mean to tell me," he said carefully, "that in all your years cutting, here you've never once cut a black person's hair?" The barber gave a small shrug, his hands still gripping the broom handle. "Ain't my specialty." James studied the man's face. He wasn't a nervous young apprentice unsure of his skills. He was an experienced barber, the kind who had probably cut thousands of heads in his lifetime. If he had really wanted to learn, he could have. But he hadn't. And James knew why. Tyler tugged at James's sleeve again, his voice small. "Dad, what's wrong?" James glanced down at his son. Tyler's face was scrunched up in confusion, his innocent mind trying to piece together what was happening. James had spent years shielding his son from this kind of moment, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that he could delay the day Tyler learned what it felt like to be seen as other. But here it was, unfolding in a dingy barbershop on a quiet afternoon. James felt something cold settle in his chest. He straightened, his voice quiet but firm. "Come on, Tyler, we're leaving." The barber said nothing, just resumed sweeping, acting as if they had never been there at all. James inhaled deeply, forcing the anger coiling in his chest to unfurl before it took hold of him. He had learned long ago that moments like these could go one of two ways. Either you let them define you, or you turn them into something greater. And right now, his son was watching. Tyler was still gripping his sleeve, his small fingers twisting the fabric, his innocent face scrunched in confusion. He didn't fully understand what had just happened, but James knew one day he would. One day, he would remember this moment, and James wanted to make sure he remembered it the right way. "Come on, son," James said softly, his voice even. He turned toward the door, guiding Tyler with him. Every step felt weighted, as if the walls of the barbershop were pressing in, suffocating the space between them and the others who remained silent. But before James reached the door, he paused. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. The leather was worn, smooth from years of use. His fingers moved with purpose as he slipped out a crisp $100 bill. The sound of it hitting the counter was like a crack of thunder in the suffocating silence. The barber's eyes flickered toward the bill, then back to James, suspicion etched into his weathered face. James met his gaze, unwavering. "That's for the lesson you just taught my son," he said evenly. His voice carried through the shop, cutting through the thick air. The barber's sneer deepened. "I don't need your money." James let a small knowing smile tug at the corner of his lips. "Oh, I know, and you'll never get another cent from us." but consider it a tip for the kind of man my son will never grow up to be." A few of the customers shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable. One man cleared his throat. Another stole a glance at the barber, as if reconsidering where he sat. The barber's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His pride wouldn't let him acknowledge the weight of James's words. Tyler blinked up at his father, still trying to understand. "Dad, why did you give him money if he was mean to us?" James looked down at his son, his expression softening. He knelt so they were eye level, brushing a hand over Tyler's small shoulder. "Because, son," he said gently, "some people's ignorance is more expensive than they realize, and we just paid for his." Tyler tilted his head, thoughtful, his young mind absorbing every word. James stood, took his son's hand, and walked out of the barbershop without another glance back. The bell above the door jingled as it closed behind them, but inside, the weight of James's words still hung in the air. That night, the old barbershop sat under the glow of a flickering street lamp, the neon open sign now dim. Inside, the air still carried the weight of what had transpired earlier, lingering like an unsettled storm. The barber, Raymond Walker, sat in his usual chair, his jaw tight, his mind replaying the moment over and over. He didn't think much of it at first, just another customer walking out, another moment of discomfort he had long since justified in his own way. But something gnawed at him now, an uneasy feeling twisting in his gut. The silence from the other customers after James had left had been different, too heavy, too charged. Then, the door swung open with force. Raymond jolted, gripping the armrests of his chair as his boss, Richard Calloway, strode in, a tall man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper temper. Richard had owned the shop for decades, priding himself on the reputation it had built in the community. Tonight, however, his face was thunderous. "You turned down who?" Richard's voice was low, dangerous. Raymond blinked, straightening. "What are you talking about?" Richard took 2 steps forward, his glare pinning him in place. "You turned down James Carter's kid?" Raymond's breath caught. His fingers twitched. I didn't know his name," he muttered. Richard let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Of course you didn't." He leaned in, his voice now a growl. "But you should have. Because James Carter isn't just some guy off the street. He's one of the most respected civil rights lawyers in the city. And you just insulted him and his son in front of a room full of witnesses." The color drained from Raymond's face. James Carter. The name crashed into him like a freight train. The same James Carter who had made headlines taking on high-profile discrimination cases. The man who had gone up against corporations, police departments, hell, even city officials, and won. Raymond swallowed hard. Richard's lip curled in disgust. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Raymond opened his mouth, but no words came. Richard shook his head, his voice cold as steel. "You just made it clear to every person in that shop that this business tolerates hate. And let me tell you something, Ray. We don't, not in my shop." Raymond's chest tightened. "Richard, come on! You're fired." The words hit like a slap. Raymond shot to his feet. "Wait, you can't just—" Richard cut him off. "I can, and I just did. Get your things and get out. This shop has served this community for years, all of it, and I'll be damned if I let one bitter old fool ruin that." The room was spinning. Fired? Just like that? Raymond clenched his fists, his pride screaming at him to argue, to fight back, but deep down he knew. He had made a mistake, a massive one. And now he was paying for it. As he grabbed his things, shame burned hot in his chest. He had thought he was in control when he muttered those words to James, when he dismissed them so easily. But now the tables had turned. A week had passed since the incident at the old barbershop. The sting of it still lingered in James's mind, though not in the way the barber might have hoped. He had spent the last few days answering phone calls, not from reporters or legal colleagues, but from friends and neighbors who had been in the shop that day, people who had seen everything. Some apologized for not speaking up. Others wanted to know if he was going to take legal action, but James wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in something far more important, teaching his son the right way to move forward. So that Saturday morning, as the sun bathed the city streets in golden light, James and Tyler found themselves standing in front of a different barbershop. This one was smaller, humbler, but something about it felt right. The sign above the door read, "Mason's Cuts and Styles," and the windows were lined with photos of smiling customers, kids, fathers, grandfathers, a place that welcomed everyone. Tyler peered up at his father. "Is this the place?" James nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yeah, bud, this is the place." As they stepped inside, they were met with the rich scent of aftershave and the rhythmic hum of clippers. The walls were decorated with framed photos of local sports teams, jazz musicians, and newspaper clippings of community events. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile looked up from his chair and grinned. "Well, look who we have here," the barber said, setting down his clippers. "You must be Tyler." Tyler blinked in surprise. "How do you know? My name?" The barber chuckled. "Word travels fast. Name's Mason, and I heard you're looking for a fresh cut." Tyler hesitated, then grinned. "Yeah," Mason gestured toward the barber chair. "Hop on up, kid. Let's get you looking sharp." As Tyler climbed into the seat, James took a slow breath, letting the tension of the past week melt away. Here, there were no uneasy stares, no hesitations. Just warmth, acceptance, and the simple act of a father bringing his son in for a haircut. The clippers buzzed to life, and James watched as Tyler's face lit up with excitement. He glanced at their reflection in the mirror, meeting his son's gaze. "That's the thing about hate," James said quietly, just loud enough for Tyler to hear. "It always ends up cutting itself." Tyler tilted his head. "What do you mean, Dad?" James smiled. "That barber from last week? He thought he was hurting us by turning us away. But in the end, he was the one who lost. His job, his reputation, maybe even his business." Tyler thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "So, we don't have to fight back?" James squeezed his son's shoulder. "Sometimes the best way to fight back is to live well, to stand tall, and to choose places and people who lift us up instead of tear us down." Tyler grinned as Mason dusted off the last of the stray hairs and spun the chair around for the final reveal. "What do you think, kid?" Mason asked. Tyler turned his head from side to side, admiring his fresh cut. "I think I look awesome," James chuckled. "That's because you do." As he paid Mason and shook his hand, James felt something settle deep within him, an understanding that his son had learned a lesson far more valuable than any argument could have taught. Walking out into the sunshine, Tyler reached for his father's hand. "Thanks, Dad." James squeezed it gently. "Anytime, kiddo, anytime. Hate may shout the loudest, but dignity speaks the strongest." James showed his son that true strength isn't in anger or retaliation, but in self-respect and composure. By refusing to stoop to the barber's level, he turned the moment into a powerful lesson, one that exposed the ugliness of discrimination without needing to raise his voice. In the end, hate and prejudice don't just harm their targets, they ultimately destroy those who spread them. The barber's refusal cost him far more than a lost customer. It cost him his reputation, his job, and his place in the community. This story serves as a reminder that racism has no place in society, and that every action, good or bad, has consequences. James and Tyler didn't need to fight or demand justice. The world took care of that for them. When faced with discrimination, standing tall and moving forward with grace is the most powerful response. In the end, hate always cuts. Self down while dignity stands unshaken.